In this video, I want to show you how to process a file and get some information from it. So specifically, I'll just repeat the example from the workshop where we were working with this file, January06.txt, and we're trying to get the smallest temperature, the lowest temperature on record. So the first thing I'll do is I'll actually save the file. So so I can do it like this. So I can right click and then I say save link as, and now I'll save it in my C4M folder on my desktop like this. So that's a folder on my desktop. I'll just replace the existing file. Now I'll want to access it in Paizo, so the way I'll do it is I'll say import OS, and then I'll say os.change directory, and then I'll give the path of my folder on my desktop, which would be home Gerjoy, which is my username, desktop, and C4M, which is the folder in which I put the file. So if you're using Windows, then the path would look something like C users, and then whatever your username is, and then if you put the folder on the desktop, it would look like this. Of course, you don't necessarily have to put it on your desktop. Maybe you put it in like documents and stuff, then it would look like this. If you're using a Mac, then it would look, so this is Windows. If you're using a Mac, it would look something like users, and then your username, and then whatever it is, you know, possibly desktop, possibly something else, C4M. But if you create a folder on your desktop, it would look like this on a Mac. So, okay, at any rate, so now I get to actually read the file. So let's quickly check that I can read the file. The way I would check it is I would say f is equal to open, and then I just, so since I already changed to the folder where I saved the file, I can just say January06.txt, and I'll give it an R. And if this line works, so I'll highlight it and I'll execute it. If it works, if it doesn't give me an error over here, that means everything's all right. So if I give it like the wrong name, I'll get an error, but otherwise that should work. And now if I actually want to get the text of the file, I can get the entire text using text equals f.read. So f.read returns the entire contents of the file as a string. So I can do it like that, and that's the contents of the file. The reason it looks different is because the /t stands for tab. So if we actually were to look at the file, those are tabs. And of course, the new line somewhere here is a new line, that stands for new line. So it looks a little bit weird. Of course, if I print it, it'll look less weird. So the way I would do it is I would say print text, and now that's the contents of the file. Okay, let's look at the file a little bit more carefully. So this is what it looks like. Let me extend it a little bit like that. So this is what it looks like. So the first line is just the names of the columns in the data set. And the second line is like units, stuff like that. So really we're only interested in the third line. So if you remember, let's forget about the fread. So if you remember, the way to get an individual line is to say f.readLine. So let's try that. So I'll say print, and I'll say f.readLine. Now it's important to reinitialize the variable f every time that you try this, because otherwise we'll see why in a second. So here I ran it just the once and I got the first line. If I run it again, I'll get something different. And if I run it again, I'll get something different. If I run it again, I'll get something different. So Python actually remembers where you are in the file, and every time you do f.readLine, gives you the next line. How do you get the very first line? Well, here what I did is I opened the file anew. So if I try to run this line again, I'll get the first line. So what do we want to do? So what we want to do is we want to first read this line and just discard it, then read this line and then just discard it, and then actually start reading everything else. Okay, great. Let's do that. How to do that? So the way I'll do it is I'll say f equals open January06.txt, so that's all good. Now what I'll say is f.readLine. So ordinarily this returns some value, but I won't use the return value. What I need to do is I need to skip to the second line, and now I want to skip to the third line. And now at this point, if I use f.readLine, it would return the first line of the actual data. Right? So that wasn't true here. Here it would return the header. This would return the second line of the header. But if I do f.readLine again, then what I'll get is the first line, so this line from the data. Let's try to read some of this manually. So I'll execute all of that. I'm pressing Alt-Enter now, so that's executed. So now if I go f.readLine in the shell, I'll get this guy. And now I'll get this guy, and now I'll get this guy, and now I'll get this guy, and so on. So the very last thing that I'll get before I run out of things to read in the file is the empty string. This is why I get to do this thing. So what I'll say is, I'll say line is equal to f.readLine. So at this point, line contains, at this point, line contains the first line of the data table. And here's what I'll do now. I'll say while line is not the empty string, I want to keep reading. And for the first example, let's say that all I want to do is I want to just spit the line back to the user, not do anything with it. So I'll say print line, and now I'll say line equals f.readLine. So what's that going to do? So at this point, line is going to be the first line in the data table. Now we print this first line, and now we update this line to be the next line. Now we go back here, we check, is the next line just empty? And if it is, we say, okay, we're done. This was the last thing that we can read from the file. If line is not equal to the empty string, then we print it again, and now we update it again. So what this is going to do is it's going to print all the data lines from the file. Let's try it. Great. Why is there a space here? Well, let's look at the first line, and that'll become clear. So here's the first line. That's what it looks like, and you see there is a new line here at the end. Of course, every time you use print, you also insert another new line. So if I say print line, what will happen is I print one new line, which is this guy, and then print automatically adds another new line. We're not that worried about it, because what we can do is we can split the line into individual components. So if I do line.split, what it produces is a list of the strings that are separated by spaces, and that includes tabs. And it doesn't include the last new line, that also gets stripped away. So if I say print line.split, here's what I'll get. I'll get all the data lines, but represented as lists of strings. Now, let's say that what I want is I want the temperature. How do we get the temperature? Well, what you need is you need this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. So which column is the temperature? Well, we could just count it and say this is column 0, 1, 2, 3. Let's do something slightly more fun. Let's actually say, okay, so this is the header which tells us where the temperature is. Let's find out where it is. So let's call the index of the temperature. So this would be, if this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, then the index of temperature is going to be 3. And what that means is that if I want this guy, and I have this represented as a list, then I want element number 3 as well, and element number 3 from here as well, in order to get the temperature. So how would I do it? I would say line equals f read line, and then temp index is going to be, and let's split it so that now it's a list. Note that the reason we originally did it is because we just wanted to skip this header. We just wanted to skip this guy. But nobody said that we can't also use the thing, right? So this is going to be line, and let's call it not line. Line is this string. Let's call this line lems. And here we'll say lems.index of temp. Let's try this. This is not lems, this is line lems. Sorry. Let's try this, and let's see. Temp index is now 3. We could just use 3, but let's be nice about it. So we found out that if we want the temperature, we need line lems at 3 if we split this string into a list. So okay. So let's do that. So we'll say line lems is equal to line.split. And at this point we can say, okay, we want the temperature. Let me do this. So line right now is this guy. So let me get a reasonable kind of line. So I'll do fread line a couple times. And now let me say line equals f.readLine. And now I can say line lems equals line.split. Great. So this is line lems. All right. So this is it. So now if I say line lems at temp index, then I'll get the temperature. But the temperature that I got, that's a string. I want it to be a float so that I can compare different temperatures to each other, because it doesn't really make sense to try to compare a temperature like this to a temperature like this. Let's say, 115.5. So that's going to be false, even though if you compare those as floats, that's going to be true. So what I need to do is I need to actually say current temperature is equal to line lems temp index. So that's a string. I need to convert it to a float. All right. So that's the current temperature. So that's the temperature that I extracted from a particular line. So now let's actually store all the temperatures that we have. So let's have like all temperatures. And initially it's going to be an empty list. Now every time that I obtain a current temperature, what I'll do is I'll append it to all temperatures, like so. Now let me execute this. Great. So there was a bit of a problem, but we'll fix it. So what's the problem? The problem is list index out of range. So that's an error. That means that what I do is I say shell postmortem. So this is where I got the error. I tried to access, so it says list index out of range when I try to do this. So if I try this guy, that's probably going to be some kind of error. So let me see. Okay, there is an error. So what's line lems? Well, it's the empty list. Temp index is 3, so that's obviously not gonna work. So how should we fix it? What's the problem? Well, the problem is the very last line in the file is going to be the empty string. And if we split it, it's going to produce the empty list. So how should we fix it? Well, I actually made an error. What I need to do is I need to first extract the temperature and only then to obtain the new line. So let me do that. So I just swap the locations. So I first read in the temperature, and at the end I update the line. That's the last thing I do. Let's also stop printing the elements. That doesn't actually do that much for us. Okay, let me press stop. And let me do it again. Great. Okay, so now the idea is that I appended the current temperature, which is a float, because I converted the string to a float. I appended it to the list all temps. So let's see what the list all temps now looks like. Great. We have all the temperatures. Now, what did we want? We wanted the smallest temperature. So how should we output it? So we'd say smallest temperature. And then what I can print is I can print the minimum of all the temperatures. So after I'm done with this while loop, all temperatures contains all the temperatures that are read in from the file. So let me run this, and there you are. It's minus 12.14.